Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
When I was around 10 years old, my family and I went on vacation to the beach. We were staying in a hotel that had a layout I still remember pretty clearly, mostly because the way the building was designed became such an important part of what happened. Our room was on an upper floor, not at ground level. The hallways outside the rooms were open air, so instead of stepping into an indoor carpeted corridor, you walked out onto a covered walkway exposed to the outside air. There were stairwells at both ends. Those stairs led down to the ground floor, where there was a deck or walkway that eventually opened toward the beach. In other words, if you walked out of our hotel room, went down the stairs, and continued through the lower area, you could eventually reach the sand. There was nothing strange about the hotel itself. It was just a beach hotel. Families everywhere. People coming back from swimming. Wet towels. Sand getting tracked into places where it did not belong. The normal vacation atmosphere. Our room was more like a small suite than one basic bedroom. There was a kitchen and living room area, one separate bedroom, and then, almost immediately beside the entrance door, a bunk bed that had been built directly into the wall. That was where my sister and I slept. The location of those bunk beds matters. They were right beside the door. You could not really enter or leave the room without passing them. If somebody walked to the door during the night, they would have been only a few feet away from us. Another important detail was the lock. The door had the normal hotel lock, but it also had a deadbolt on the inside. As I remember it, that deadbolt could only be engaged from inside the hotel room. There was no way to stand outside in the hallway and lock it after leaving. At the time, of course, none of that seemed important. It was just the door. It was just where I slept. Then one morning, I woke up somewhere completely different. My first memory is becoming aware that I was cold and damp. I was lying on sand. For a few seconds, I was too groggy to understand what was wrong. The sky was beginning to brighten. The sun had not fully risen yet, but there was enough early morning light coming over the horizon that I could see where I was. The beach. I was outside, not on the hotel balcony, not beside the pool. Actually, on the beach. I was wearing my SpongeBob pajamas. I remember that detail because of how ridiculous it looked. I was a 10-year-old kid lying on damp sand near sunrise in pajamas that I had gone to sleep in inside a hotel room. I had no shoes on that I remember. No towel, no bag, nothing that would suggest I had intentionally decided to go outside. I just woke up there. I sat up. I was confused before I was even frightened. I had absolutely no memory of getting out of bed. No memory of opening the hotel door. No memory of walking along the open hallway. No memory of going down the stairs. No memory of crossing the deck. No memory of reaching the beach. Nothing. My memory went from being asleep in the room to waking up on the sand. That was it. At first, I tried to get my bearings. The beach looked different that early in the morning. During the day, it was full of people. Families, umbrellas, kids running around, noise at dawn. Everything was quiet. The whole place felt empty in comparison. I remember looking toward the hotel and realizing how far I had somehow traveled while having no memory of doing it. That was when I started feeling scared. I got up and headed back. I knew where our hotel was. I knew how to return. So I made my way off the sand, across the lower area, and back toward the stairs. I climbed up to our floor. Then I walked along the hallway to our room. I expected to open the door and go inside. Instead, it was locked. I could not get in. I tried again. Still locked. Eventually, I started knocking. My dad finally came to the door. When he opened it and saw me standing outside in pajamas, he was confused. I told him I had woken up on the beach. He did not understand how that could have happened. Neither did I. The obvious explanation was sleepwalking. And honestly, if that were the entire story, I would probably accept it. Kids sleepwalk. Adults sleepwalk. People can perform surprisingly complicated actions while not fully conscious. Someone can get out of bed, walk through a house, open doors, go downstairs, even leave a building, then later have little or no memory of it. So, maybe I got up sometime before sunrise, opened the hotel door, walked down the stairs, followed the path to the beach, and eventually lay down on the sand. Strange, dangerous, but possible. That explanation has always made sense to me up to one point. The deadbolt. When I returned, the door was locked from the inside. That is the detail I have never been able to comfortably explain. As I remember the door, the deadbolt could only be thrown by someone inside the hotel room. So if I sleepwalked out of the room, I could not have locked that deadbolt behind myself. Someone still inside would have had to do it. And everyone denied doing that. That created the question I have been stuck with ever since. If I left while everyone was asleep, who locked the door? My dad did not seem to know I was gone. My family did not seem to know I was gone. Nobody had been searching for me. And because my sister and I slept in bunks right beside the entrance, I kept thinking that if somebody had walked over to lock the deadbolt after I left, they should have noticed my bed was empty. It was right there. You would pass it. You would see that I was missing. At least, that was how it seemed to me. My dad initially reacted like maybe I was joking or lying. I was not. There was no reason to make it up. I had genuinely woken outside. I remember the damp sand. I remember the early light. I remember walking back. And I remember not being able to get into the room. The sleepwalking theory was also suggested. I could accept that I might have sleepwalked. What bothered me was how the room ended up secured behind me. My family mostly brushed the whole thing off. Eventually, the vacation continued. We did whatever families do at the beach, swimming, eating, going places. The incident never became some huge family mystery, but it stayed a huge mystery to me. Even now, I do not think anything supernatural has to be involved. There are several ordinary possibilities. The first is still sleepwalking. That probably explains the missing memory better than anything else. At 10 years old, I could easily have gotten out of bed without becoming fully conscious. Hotels can also make sleep strange. Different bed, different sounds, excitement from vacation, being exhausted from swimming all day, a disrupted schedule. All of those things can contribute to unusual sleep. Maybe I entered a confused state, got up, and simply followed a familiar-looking route toward the beach. The fact that I was able to find my way there does not necessarily mean I was fully awake. The route from the room to the sand was relatively straightforward. Out the door, along the walkway, downstairs, toward the beach. A person does not need complicated navigation for that. Once I reached the sand, maybe I became tired again and lay down. Then I woke properly around sunrise. That is a frightening explanation because it means I wandered outside alone as a child without knowing it. But it is still much more believable than something carrying me out of the room. The deadbolt is where things get complicated. One possibility is that somebody in my family did lock it and simply did not remember. Maybe one of my parents woke briefly during the night. They noticed the hotel door was not fully secured. They walked over half asleep and locked it, then went back to bed. In the morning, they had no memory of doing so. That would actually mirror my own missing memory. If I could apparently leave the room without remembering, there is no reason another sleepy person could not throw a deadbolt without remembering. The action would take only seconds. Get up, see the lock, turn it, back to bed. It might never become a lasting memory. The harder question is why they did not notice I was missing. But even that may have a simple answer. The room was dark. My bunk was near the door, but that does not mean someone walking past at 4 or 5 in the morning would stop and inspect it. Blankets could have been bunched up. A pillow could look like a sleeping child in low light. If the person was barely awake, they might not look at the bed at all. Their attention would be on the lock. Turn deadbolt. Return to bed. Morning comes. No memory. That explanation is possible. It requires coincidence, but not anything impossible. Another possibility is that the deadbolt was not exactly the way I remember it. I was 10. This happened years ago. Maybe the door had a lock that could automatically engage when closed. Maybe there was a secondary latch I later remembered as a deadbolt. Maybe part of the locking mechanism could be set before the door shut. Hotel doors can have several different locking systems. There may have been a normal electronic lock plus an interior privacy latch. If I was unable to get in, perhaps I interpreted that afterward as proof that the deadbolt was engaged when really the standard hotel lock was enough to keep me outside. Maybe I did not have a key card with me. If I had sleepwalked outside without grabbing one, I would have been locked out even if no one threw the deadbolt. That is an important possibility. I remember the deadbolt because that became the center of the mystery. But memory can combine details. There definitely was an inside lock. I definitely could not get back in. Whether the inside deadbolt was specifically what prevented me from opening the door is harder to prove after so many years. If I had no room key, almost any hotel door would lock behind me automatically. That would solve nearly everything. I sleepwalk out. Door closes. Standard lock engages automatically. I wake on beach. Return, cannot get inside. Knock, dead answers. My 10-year-old mind later connects the locked door with the inside deadbolt because I knew it existed. That is honestly one of the strongest explanations. But I remember the family discussing the fact that the deadbolt was locked. That is why I have never been able to completely dismiss it. If that part is accurate, someone inside probably engaged it. There is also the possibility that one family member did know more than they admitted. Not necessarily anything sinister. Maybe someone saw me leave and assumed I was going to the bathroom or getting something. Maybe they locked the door afterward without realizing I had actually gone outside. Later, when the story became strange, they denied involvement because they did not want to admit they had failed to notice a 10-year-old leaving. I have no evidence for that. I am not accusing anyone. It is simply possible. People sometimes deny small mistakes when they become attached to a scary situation. Maybe someone thought I was in another part of the suite. Remember, there was a kitchen/living area and a separate bedroom. If I left the bunk, a sleepy adult might assume I went to the bathroom or climbed into another bed. They lock the door. Go back to sleep. Nobody checks. Then I return at sunrise. That would explain the sequence without requiring anyone to intentionally abandon me outside. Another possibility is that my sister or another family member sleepwalked too. Maybe someone followed me to the door. Maybe they shut it and locked it after I left, then returned to bed. That sounds unlikely, but if we are already considering unusual sleep behavior, it is not impossible. Still, there is no evidence for it. Nobody else reported being awake. The simplest version remains that I left alone and someone later locked the door without realizing I was gone. There is also an important inconsistency in childhood memories like this. I remember waking directly on the beach, but I do not know exactly how long I had been there. Maybe only a few minutes, maybe an hour. The sand was damp, but beach sand can stay damp near the water or from nighttime moisture. I may not have been lying there for long. It is possible I walked there closer to dawn rather than in the middle of the night. That would reduce the amount of time my family had to notice. Maybe someone locked the deadbolt only shortly before I returned. The timeline feels huge because I have no memory connecting the two places. But the actual gap could have been short. 10 minutes. 20, I have no way to know. The lack of memory makes the distance feel more mysterious than it might physically have been. If I had been awake and remembered walking down the hallway, there would be no mystery. The missing memory is what turns the trip into something almost impossible. Bedroom, then beach. No transition. That kind of memory gap is deeply unsettling. It makes it feel like you were moved rather than that you moved yourself. But sleepwalking gives a very ordinary mechanism for exactly that feeling. One thing that bothers me when I think about it now is how dangerous it actually was. At 10 years old, I was alone outside near the ocean before sunrise. I could have walked into the water. I could have fallen down the stairs. I could have wandered into the road. I could have gotten lost. A stranger could have found me. Thankfully, none of that happened. I just woke on the sand. The fact that nothing bad happened almost allowed my family to treat it as funny or unimportant. But it could have ended very differently. That may be part of why the memory stayed with me even when they dismissed it. I knew something serious had happened even if nobody else wanted to treat it that way. I also wonder whether I had a history of sleepwalking. I do not remember being known for it. If I had regularly wandered around the house at night, my family probably would have used that explanation immediately and confidently. Instead, it seems like the idea was simply thrown out because nothing else made sense. That does not mean I could not have done it once. Sleepwalking does not have to happen every night. But the lack of a known pattern made it feel less convincing to me as a kid. I kept coming back to the lock. That damn lock. I could imagine myself walking out half asleep. I could imagine finding the beach. I could even imagine lying down. What I could not imagine was reaching back through a closed door and locking a deadbolt from the inside. Therefore, someone else had to interact with the door after I left. And if someone interacted with the door, why did nobody notice I was missing? That became the logical loop I could never escape. But I think there is a mistake hidden in that reasoning. I assume that because someone locked the door, they must have carefully checked the room. Those are not the same thing. People perform automatic behaviors constantly. You get up to use the bathroom and lock a door without thinking. You turn off a light. You check the stove. You close a cabinet. Then later, you barely remember doing it. A parent waking in a hotel might instinctively check the door because they are responsible for the family's safety. They do not necessarily count children at the same time. In darkness, the empty bunk might not register. That one normal action could explain the entire puzzle. Another detail is that my dad appeared genuinely confused when he opened the door. That makes me think he probably had no idea I was gone. If he had intentionally locked me outside, his reaction would have been different. He would have known exactly where I was. Instead, seeing me outside seemed to surprise him. That supports either complete ignorance or forgotten nighttime behavior. It does not support anything deliberately malicious. The story has sometimes taken on a paranormal feeling in my memory because of how impossible the sequence seems. But there was no ghost, no figure, no strange voice, no missing time beyond what sleep can explain. Nothing happened in the hotel before or after. There was no pattern of strange events. That makes a sleep-related explanation much stronger than anything supernatural. If something unknown had carried me outside, why? Why leave me safely on the beach? Why lock the door? Why nothing else? That creates more questions than answers. Sleepwalking already explains most of the event. The lock only requires one additional ordinary action by someone inside. That is far more likely. Still, likelihood does not erase the feeling. I remember waking up confused. The sand under me, my pajamas damp, the horizon beginning to brighten. There is something frightening about being a child and opening your eyes somewhere you did not choose to go. You immediately start trying to reconstruct the missing part. Did I come here? Did someone bring me? How long have I been here? Was anyone watching me? I had no answers. I just knew I wanted to get back to my family. Then imagine the relief of reaching your hotel door only to find that you cannot open it. For a second, that must have made the situation feel even more unreal. I had left a locked room somehow. Now I could not get back into it. That is why the deadbolt became so important. It was physical evidence that did not seem to fit the explanation everyone was giving me. If they had simply said I sleepwalked and the door had automatically locked, I might have accepted it. But knowing there was an inside-only lock made me think, no, someone did something after I left. The family's refusal to discuss it seriously probably made the memory more persistent, too. When an adult gives a child a clear explanation, the child can sometimes let something go. When everyone shrugs and says you must be lying or sleepwalking, the unanswered details remain. I was not lying. That much I know. There would have been no point. I was genuinely outside. My family saw me return. So the only real question was how. I do not know if my dad ever checked the lock later. Maybe he discovered it was easier to engage than we thought. Maybe another family member admitted privately to locking it. If so, nobody told me. From my perspective, the mystery was simply abandoned. Vacation ended. We went home. Years passed. But occasionally I would remember waking on the beach and immediately think about the door. It is funny how one mechanical detail can keep an entire childhood memory alive. Without that deadbolt, the story is straightforward. A child sleepwalks. Scary, but explainable. With the deadbolt, there is one loose thread. And because everyone denied touching it, the loose thread never got tied. I also think about the bunk bed being beside the door. That was always my argument against someone unknowingly locking it. How could they not see I was gone? But again, I am applying daytime awareness to someone potentially half asleep. Imagine the room almost completely dark. A parent wakes, maybe hears the door click after I leave. They do not know what caused it. They get up, walk 2 steps, push the door closed properly, lock it. My blankets are still piled on the bunk. They glance in that direction without really seeing. Go back to sleep. That entire event could happen in less than a minute. Maybe the sound of me leaving was actually what woke them. They secure the door because they assume it somehow came open. They never realize the person who opened it is now outside. That explanation is chilling in its own way, but completely normal. The more I think about it, the more plausible it becomes. Maybe that is exactly what happened. I sleepwalked out. The door failed to latch quietly. One of my parents woke, found it unsecured, and locked it. They assumed everyone was still in bed. Then I kept walking until I reached the beach. By dawn, nobody remembered any part of it except me waking outside. That sequence solves nearly every problem. It is only speculation. But it does not require anything impossible. It also fits the fact that my family later brushed everything off. From their perspective, the answer was probably obvious enough. I sleepwalked. Someone must have locked the door. They did not think it deserved years of analysis. I was the one who experienced the missing time, so it felt much bigger to me. That difference in perspective matters. To them, Kid wandered outside. Weird to me, I went to sleep in a locked hotel room and woke up alone on a beach with no memory of leaving. Those are not emotionally the same story. Even now, I think sleepwalking is probably the best explanation. I do not believe I teleported. I do not believe something carried me out through a window. The room being above ground level makes a window exit extremely unlikely anyway. And there is no reason to assume anything paranormal when a known sleep behavior already explains the central event. What I cannot explain with certainty is who locked the deadbolt. Maybe someone did and forgot. Maybe the lock worked differently than I remember. Maybe I misunderstood which lock had actually kept me outside. Maybe childhood memory has preserved the mystery more cleanly than the real event deserved. Any one of those could be true. I am comfortable admitting that. But there is a difference between having possible explanations and knowing what happened. I still do not know, and because my family does not seem interested in discussing it, I probably never will. What remains is that first image, not ghosts, not locks, the beach. I went to sleep in a bunk bed beside my sister. My parents were somewhere else in the same hotel suite. The door was only a few feet away. Then, with no memory of anything in between, I opened my eyes on wet sand just before sunrise. I was still wearing SpongeBob pajamas. The hotel was behind me. The ocean was in front of me. For a few seconds, I had no idea how I had gotten there. Then I walked all the way back, climbed the stairs, found our room, and discovered I could not get inside. My dad eventually opened the door and looked just as confused as I felt. Maybe I sleepwalked. That is probably what happened. Maybe somebody woke after I left, locked the deadbolt, and never realized my bunk was empty. That is probably the missing piece. But everyone denied locking it. And that is why, even after all these years, I can explain almost every part of that morning except the one thing that should have been simplest. How did a sleeping 10-year-old leave a hotel room, end up alone on a beach before sunrise, and return to find the door locked from the inside? When I was probably around 8 years old, I started having a recurring dream that scared me more than almost anything else I remember from childhood. It always took place in the same kind of location. I was on what looked like a huge loading dock beside the water, the kind of industrial place where cargo ships might come in and shipping containers would be unloaded. The dock seemed enormous to me. It was made from old wood that looked dark, weathered, and damp, like it had been exposed to water and storms for decades. I do not know where the image came from. At 8 years old, I had never spent much time around giant shipping docks. Maybe I had seen something similar in a movie, on television, in a game, or in a picture without remembering it. Dreams can take an image you barely noticed and turn it into an entire world. Whatever the source was, that dock became familiar to me because I kept returning to it. The dream usually began with me already running. I never clearly knew what I was running from. That might have been one of the reasons it was so frightening. There was no monster I could point to. No person chasing me that I could describe afterward. I only knew that something was behind me and I needed to get away. The wooden dock stretched ahead while I ran. I remember the feeling of being completely exposed. Water somewhere nearby. Dark industrial structures. Old boards underneath my feet. No safe building. No adults. No obvious place to go. Eventually, I would reach a group of old 55-gallon drums or barrels sitting together on the dock. I would duck behind them and hide. I remember curling myself into a small ball with my head down near my knees, trying to make myself as small as possible. The feeling was always that whatever was chasing me could not be allowed to find me. I would stay there, listening, waiting. Then I would look to my right. There would be a little girl hiding there, too. She seemed about the same age as me. That was strange because I never knew she was there until I looked. She seemed frightened, too. For the first second, seeing another child should have made the situation feel safer. I was not alone anymore. But then she would turn toward me. The moment she saw me, she screamed. That scream is the part of the dream that stayed with me. Calling it a normal scream does not describe it. It did not sound like a child yelling because she was surprised. It did not sound like someone crying for help. The only comparison I have ever been able to make is a banshee scream. High, violent, almost impossible. It sounded full of terror and grief at the same time. The kind of scream that feels bigger than the person making it. I do not even know how my childhood brain invented a sound like that. But I heard it clearly in the dream. It felt as real as any sound I had ever heard while awake. The girl would look directly at me and release that horrible scream, and that was usually where the fear peaked. Sometimes I would wake soon afterward. Other times the dream seemed to continue briefly, but the scream is the part I remember. And it did not happen once. The dream kept coming back. From what I remember, I had it 2 or 3 times a week for something like 6 months. I was young, so I cannot promise the timeline is exact. Maybe it was shorter. Maybe it happened less often than I remember. But it happened enough that the location became familiar. The dock, the barrels, the hiding place, the girl, and the scream. When you are a child, recurring dreams can become almost like places you visit. You go to sleep and part of you fears that you will end up there again. I started knowing what would happen before it happened. I would recognize the dock. Then the fear would start. Because I knew eventually I was going to hide behind those barrels. And if I looked to the right, she would be there. Knowing what was coming never made it easier. If anything, it made it worse. I could not change the dream. I could not decide to run somewhere else. I could not tell myself not to look. Eventually, the same sequence happened. And eventually, she screamed. Then, after months of this, the dream stopped. I do not know why. 1 week it was happening regularly. Then at some point, it was gone. I probably started sleeping normally and slowly stopped thinking about it. Years passed. By the time I was around 11, the dock nightmare belonged to an earlier part of childhood. Then it came back. Same place, same kind of fear. Same little girl, same scream. For around 2 weeks, I had the dream repeatedly again. That alone was disturbing. It felt like something from when I was 8 had somehow waited several years and then returned exactly where it left off. But the part that really affected me happened after those dreams. I started hearing the scream while I was awake. I want to explain that carefully. I do not mean that I heard an actual little girl screaming somewhere in the room. There was no external person. Nobody else heard it. It felt like the sound happened inside my head. But that does not mean it felt weak or imaginary. It was vivid, Sometimes I could be fully awake during the day, doing something completely normal, and I would think a random word to myself. It could be almost any word, nothing frightening, nothing connected to the dream. Then something about that word would trigger the memory. Suddenly, the scream would play in my head. Again, and again, and again. It felt like being trapped with a sound I desperately wanted to stop. The more I tried not to hear it, the more I noticed it. The scream was still exactly as horrible as it had been in the dream. Maybe worse, because now I was awake. During a nightmare, you can eventually wake up. But what are you supposed to do when the nightmare sound appears while you are already awake? I remember being terrified by that. I did not understand why my own mind could reproduce a sound so clearly. It felt almost separate from me. I could think, stop, and it would still repeat. That went on and off, for close to a year from what I remember. Again, childhood time is hard to measure exactly, but it lasted long enough to have an effect on me. Eventually, it stopped. The dreams disappeared again. The screams stopped intruding as often. Life moved forward. By the time I was older, I probably thought I was done with it. Then, when I was around 18, it happened again. I said something silently in my head. And instantly, there it was. That same scream, years later, still recognizable, still vivid, still able to create the same terrible feeling. I am 22 now, and every once in a while it still happens. I can be thinking normally. One thought leads to another. A random internal word somehow connects with whatever pattern triggers the memory. And suddenly I hear that scream in my mind again. I still cannot describe it properly. Banshee is the closest word I have, but even that does not capture it. It is not only loud in my memory, it is sad. There is something deeply miserable in it. It sounds like terror mixed with grief. Even though I never heard the sound from a real person in waking life, it remains one of the most upsetting sounds I can imagine. Writing about the first part of this experience can still make me emotional. That tells me how deeply the dream affected me. The logical part of me knows it was a dream. The emotional part still reacts as though I am back behind those barrels with that girl looking at me. I have thought a lot about how something I never physically heard could become so vivid. But dreams can create sounds. That is not unusual. People hear voices in dreams. Music, explosions, animals, entire conversations. The brain is capable of producing an internal experience of sound without sound waves actually entering the ears. Most dream sounds disappear quickly after waking. This one did not. Maybe because it terrified me so badly. Fear makes certain memories stronger. If the same dream happened repeatedly for months, the scream would be rehearsed over and over again. My brain may have reinforced the same sound every time. Instead of being one nightmare forgotten the next morning, it became a deeply learned memory. That could explain why it eventually began appearing while I was awake. The experience reminds me less of hearing something outside myself and more of a sound memory becoming intrusive. People can get songs stuck in their heads without choosing to hear them. A short piece of music repeats. You try to stop it. It comes back. Sometimes a phrase does the same thing. A word, a voice. For me, unfortunately, the thing that became stuck was not a song. It was that scream. The random words that triggered it may have been connected in ways I did not consciously understand. Maybe certain sounds, certain rhythms, certain emotional associations. Maybe I started becoming afraid that any word could trigger it, and that fear itself increased how often it happened. Once you start monitoring your thoughts for something, you notice it more. If I thought, please do not let the scream start, I had already reminded myself of the scream. Then, naturally, I heard it in memory. That can create a vicious loop. You fear the sound. Fear makes you think about it. Thinking about it brings the sound back. The sound scares you again. That does not make the experience fake. The fear is real. The sound memory is real. It simply means the mechanism may come from how memory and attention work rather than anything external trying to communicate. I never had evidence that the girl from the dream existed somewhere in real life. I never found a photograph of her. I never went to a dock and recognized the place. I never learned about a child dying there. There was no outside confirmation. The dream was just a dream as far as I know, and the scream was something my brain created inside it. Still, because it kept returning at different ages, it felt important. At 8, then 11, then 18, now occasionally at 22. It creates the impression that something followed me through different stages of my life. But memory itself can do that. You do not leave your childhood brain behind when you grow up. Old fears can survive in surprising ways. A smell can suddenly bring you back to kindergarten. A song can recreate a whole summer. A nightmare can leave behind a sound strong enough to reappear years later. There was another recurring dream from my childhood that makes me think my mind was simply very good at creating intense, threatening scenes. This one took place in my neighbor's house. They used to babysit me, so I knew the house well. Their basement was divided into two sections. One side was a laundry area. The other side was more of a kid's playroom. I had been down there in real life. It was not some completely invented location. In the dream, I would go downstairs and stand near the division between those two spaces. The laundry side was dark, especially the corner near the furnace. That corner always seemed completely black, not normal dimness. In the dream, it looked like a patch of darkness where I could not see anything at all. I would stand there staring into it. Then I would get the feeling that someone was behind me. That feeling is something else I remember from childhood. Even outside dreams, I sometimes had moments where I suddenly felt as though somebody was standing behind me. I would turn around quickly. Usually, nobody was there. Looking back, that kind of sensation probably made perfect sense for a nervous kid. If you are already afraid, your brain becomes sensitive to what you cannot see. Behind you is always the biggest unknown. In the basement dream, I would feel that presence behind me. Then I would turn. My neighbors had a Rottweiler, and in the dream, the dog would be standing there. It was barking aggressively at me, not playful barking, not warning me about something else. It seemed angry at me. The dog would bark and bark. I would become frightened. Then I would scream back at it. But the sound that came out was not my voice. It was deep. Wrong, demonic is the word I always used for it. I would open my mouth expecting my own scream and hear something that sounded like it belonged to something else. The dog would react immediately. It would become afraid. Then it would run away from me. That dream repeated for a long time, too. Maybe around a year. The exact length is difficult to remember, but it happened enough that I knew the sequence. Basement, dark laundry room, feeling behind me. Turn, Rottweiler, aggressive, barking. My scream, wrong voice. Dog runs, again and again. There are obvious similarities between the two dreams. Both involve fear turning into sound. In the dock dream, the girl screams at me. In the basement dream, I am the one making the frightening sound. Both sounds are abnormal, not normal human voices. One is banshee-like, the other is demonic. Both dreams also place me somewhere that feels unsafe. A huge, empty industrial dock. a dark basement. And both contain another living figure that suddenly reacts to me. The girl sees me and screams. The dog sees me and barks. That pattern makes me think these dreams may say more about childhood fear than about any outside presence. My brain was taking ordinary fears and giving them voices. A dock is scary because I am being chased. A basement is scary because I cannot see into the dark corner. A little girl should be comforting because she is my age, so the dream reverses that and makes her terrifying. A familiar dog should be recognizable, so the dream makes it aggressive. Then even my own voice becomes unfamiliar. Dreams are very good at taking something safe and changing one detail. That one wrong detail can be more disturbing than creating a monster from scratch. The little girl frightened me because she looked like a normal child until she screamed. The basement dog frightened me because it was a real dog I knew, but it behaved differently. My own scream frightened me because it came from my body, but did not sound like me. That loss of familiarity may have been the common theme. Even the feeling of someone being behind me fits. The threat is always close, but not fully visible. Something chasing me on the dock. Something behind me in the basement. Fear without a clear source. At 8 years old, I did not think about any of that. I just dreaded sleeping. Recurring dreams can make bedtime feel like you are waiting for an appointment with something you hate. You know the dream is not real during the day. Then nighttime comes, and the fear returns. Will it happen again tonight? That question alone may increase the chance of dreaming about it again, because the dream is the last thing on your mind before sleep. That could help explain why these dreams happened in clusters, several times a week for months, then nothing. Then, years later, another cluster. Stress, sleep changes, or simply remembering the old dream might have brought it back. I do not know what was happening in my life at 8 or 11 that could have influenced it. I do not want to invent some hidden trauma or pretend every nightmare has a symbolic explanation. Sometimes children have recurring nightmares without there being one dramatic cause. The brain is developing. Emotions are intense. The imagination is strong. One disturbing dream happens. Then fear of the dream helps recreate it. That may be enough. The dock itself may have come from some forgotten piece of media. The barrels are specific, but that does not make them mysterious. Old drums are common imagery in industrial areas. Maybe I saw them on television. Maybe in a cartoon. Maybe an adult drove past an industrial site with me in the car. The memory entered my mind without being important. Then, the dream used it. Same with the little girl. She may have been based on a classmate, a face from television, or nobody in particular. Dream faces do not always correspond to people we can later identify. The scream is harder for me emotionally because it feels completely unique, but even that can be constructed. The brain knows what screaming sounds like. It knows high pitches, animal cries, movie sound effects, people yelling, wind, music, a dream, can combine those into something that feels unlike anything consciously remembered. The fact that I cannot describe it perfectly may actually be normal. A dream sound does not have to obey real-world acoustics. It can feel louder than anything physically possible. It can have emotional qualities that are hard to translate into words. When I remember it now, I may also be remembering the feeling attached to the sound as much as the sound itself. Maybe what I call the saddest and most terrifying scream is partly an emotional memory. I remember how it made me feel. Then the brain reconstructs the sound to match that feeling. That does not lessen its impact. If anything, it explains why it remains so powerful. The later daytime episodes bothered me because I was fully awake. That distinction is important to me. I was not lying in bed half asleep every time. Sometimes I was just going about my day. A word appeared in my internal thoughts. Then the scream returned. But hearing a sound in your mind is not the same as hearing an external sound with your ears. Most people can voluntarily imagine a familiar voice. Think of someone you know saying your name. You may almost hear the voice internally. Now imagine the same process happening involuntarily with a frightening memory. That could feel extremely intrusive, without meaning an external sound is present. It is similar to when a disturbing image suddenly enters your thoughts, even though you do not want it there. The problem is not that the image exists outside you. The problem is that your brain keeps replaying it. That is how I think about the scream now. A deeply reinforced auditory memory. Something built in dreams, but remembered strongly enough that certain thoughts can trigger it. The fact that it disappeared for years and then returned also fits memory. Old associations can lie quiet for a long time. Then something activates them. Maybe a word had a similar sound to something in the dream. Maybe I was stressed. Maybe I had recently remembered the dock without realizing it. There could be many reasons. I do not know which one applies. What I do know is that the scream itself never gave me information. It never told me where to go. It never warned me about an event. It never predicted anything. It was simply the same frightening sound. That makes it less like a message and more like memory. If there was something external trying to communicate, repeating the exact emotional noise for years without any clear meaning would be an odd way to do it. The basement dream is similar. My demonic voice never said words. It was simply an impossible version of my own scream. The dog ran away. Then the dream would end or continue in ways I no longer remember. Again, emotion rather than information. Fear expressed as sound. There is also something interesting about the roles reversing. In the dock dream, I am the frightened one hiding. The girl screams at me, making me feel like I am the thing she is afraid of. Why? I never understood that. She looks scared before she sees me. Then she looks at me and screams as if I am worse than whatever we were hiding from. That always bothered me. What did she see when she looked at me? Was she actually afraid of me? Was something behind me? The dream never explained it. In the basement dream, the dog is aggressive until I scream. Then the dog becomes afraid of me. Again, I suddenly become the frightening thing. That similarity is unsettling. But it does not have to mean something supernatural. Dreams can explore fear by changing perspective. A child afraid of being chased can dream that someone else is terrified of them. A child afraid of a barking dog can suddenly produce the more powerful sound. The dream gives the dreamer control in a disturbing way. Maybe that is what was happening. The basement dream begins with me feeling vulnerable. Dark room. Something behind me. Aggressive dog. Then I scream with a voice more frightening than the dog, and it runs. The fear reverses. In some strange dream logic, maybe that is my mind defending itself. The dock dream does not give me that power, but the little girl's reaction still places me in an ambiguous role. Maybe she sees the thing chasing us standing behind me. Maybe she is screaming because I have led it to her. Maybe there is no explanation at all. Dreams often create scenes that feel meaningful without containing a coherent answer. That may be why they are so hard to forget. Your mind keeps trying to solve something that was never designed to be solvable. I have done that for years with the girl. Why did she scream when she looked at me? What was behind the barrels? What was chasing me? Why a dock? Why did the sound come back years later? There may not be one hidden answer. The dream may simply have been a recurring fear pattern. Once it became familiar, My brain kept returning to it because familiarity itself makes recurring dreams easier to recreate. The emotional response then kept the memory strong enough to survive into adulthood. I do not dismiss the impact it had on me. Even if there is a normal explanation, living with a frightening internal sound for that long can be exhausting. The fact that I can still become emotional writing about it shows the experience left a mark. I would never tell my younger self it was just a dream, so it does not matter. Dreams can matter because our nervous system reacts to them. A nightmare can wake you sweating, heart racing, shaking. The body does not wait for proof that the danger is real. If the same nightmare happens repeatedly, the fear can begin before sleep. Then if one of its sounds starts intruding during the day, it can feel like there is nowhere to get away from it. That is what scared me most. The doc was no longer confined to sleep. The scream had escaped the dream. Not literally, but in the only way that mattered to me as a child. I could hear it while awake. At the same time, the fact that the sound happens internally and can be triggered by thought is an important clue. It suggests the memory itself is the source. If it ever became frequent again, felt uncontrollable, interfered seriously with sleep or everyday life, or started feeling like an external voice rather than an internal memory, talking with a qualified professional would be a reasonable step. Not because a recurring dream automatically means something is wrong, but because there is no reason to keep suffering through something that has such a strong emotional effect when help understanding it may be available. But as far as the story itself goes, I do not have evidence of anything paranormal. I have recurring dreams, an extremely vivid sound created inside those dreams, and an involuntary memory of that sound that sometimes returns. The basement dream strengthens that interpretation because it shows my childhood dreams repeatedly created impossible voices. The banshee scream belonged to the girl. The demonic scream belonged to me. Both were frightening enough to become long-term memories. I can still see the basement, too. The playroom behind me. Laundry area ahead. The furnace near the dark corner. That blackness always seemed deeper than the rest of the room. I would stare into it. Then that old familiar sensation would arrive. Someone is behind you. I would turn around. The Rottweiler would be there, barking aggressively, its body tense. Teeth may be visible, though I cannot trust every detail anymore. Then I would scream, and the sound that came out of me was wrong. Lower, more distorted, not human in the way I expected my own voice to be. The dog would stop. Then, retreat, run, and somehow the thing I had been afraid of became afraid of me. That dream repeated for what felt like around a year. I do not remember hearing that demonic voice while awake in the same way I heard the little girl scream. Maybe that is why the doc dream became the stronger memory. It crossed the boundary. The basement stayed in sleep. The doc followed me into daytime thought. Even now, at 22, I can go long periods without thinking about any of it. Then some random thought happens. A word, a mental phrase. I do not always know what the connection is. And suddenly I remember the scream. For a moment, I am not an adult anymore. I am 8 years old again, running across old wooden boards. Something behind me, no idea what it is, hiding behind industrial drums, trying to become small enough not to be found. Then, looking to my right, a little girl curled up nearby. She is scared too. For 1 second, I think we are hiding from the same thing. Then she turns her head, looks directly at me, and screams with a sound so full of terror that almost 2 decades later, my own mind can still reproduce enough of it to make my stomach drop. I do not think she was a ghost. I do not think the dock was necessarily a real place. I do not think the scream came from somewhere outside me. The most grounded explanation is that a recurring childhood nightmare became deeply embedded in memory, and the strongest sensory part of it sometimes returns involuntarily. The basement dream shows that my mind was capable of creating similarly impossible sounds in other nightmares. That explanation makes sense. But understanding where a memory may come from does not automatically erase its emotional power. The girl has never aged in my mind. The dock has never changed. The barrels are still there. She is still about 8 years old. And whenever that scream returns, even for only a moment, it sounds exactly as frightened as it did the first time I hid beside her and made the mistake of looking over.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
My family moved around a lot when I was growing up, so we lived in several different houses over the years. Some of them were completely forgettable. Normal neighborhoods, normal rooms, normal yards. Then there was the house we lived in when we were in Oregon. That place is harder to forget. It was a large, old, two-story house. And even when I was younger, I remember thinking it felt old in a way our other houses did not. I want to say it was from somewhere around the 1950s, although I cannot be completely sure about the exact year. It was not some beautiful historic mansion. It was just old. The kind of house where things had clearly been repaired, covered up, or changed over the years. There were places where the wood looked different. Odd little spaces. Things that made you wonder what previous owners had done there. The property outside did not help. There was an old well behind the house that had been boarded over. Nobody really used it. I do not remember anyone explaining exactly why it had been covered, but as a kid, a boarded-up well already seemed creepy enough. Then there was the shed. Something dead was inside it. I remember thinking it was a cow, or at least part of some large animal. Whatever it was enough that we did not want to spend time in there. The shed became one of those places we simply avoided. You knew it was there. You knew something unpleasant was inside. So you stayed away. None of this meant the property was haunted or anything like that. Old rural properties have old wells. Animals die. Sheds get abandoned. People leave strange things behind when they move. But when you are a kid, those ordinary explanations do not stop the place from feeling like it has secrets. And this house definitely had secrets. The strangest one was upstairs. There was a bedroom on the second floor with a closet. Inside that closet was a wooden panel. It did not immediately look like a normal door, but if you moved or opened the panel, you could get through into a small, hidden attic space behind the wall. Calling it a secret room might make it sound more dramatic than it really was. Old houses often have unfinished spaces behind closets or walls. Sometimes they are used to access pipes, wiring, or sections underneath the roof. But to me and my sister, finding a panel that opened into a space we did not know existed was exciting. At first, we wanted to explore it. That is what kids do. If you tell a child there is a hidden space inside an old house, they are going to want to know what is inside. We opened the panel and looked in. The area beyond was dark, dusty, cramped. It was not somewhere people had been regularly walking around. There was no finished floor, comfortable lighting, or anything that made it feel like part of the bedroom. It felt separate from the house, even though, technically, it was inside the walls. I remember looking around. Then, We saw something. There was a small object wrapped in cloth. At first, I did not know what it was. Neither did my sister. It was not shaped like a normal box or bundle of clothes. It looked organic, like something had been wrapped deliberately. The more I looked at it, the more I thought it might be a small animal. That is still the best description I can give. A small, wrapped-up animal. I cannot tell you exactly what species. I did not stay there long enough to inspect it. I did not unwrap it. I did not touch it. I did not get close enough to figure out whether there were bones inside. It looked enough like something dead that I immediately wanted nothing to do with it. The cloth was discolored too, dark brown. The color seemed to cover a lot of it. At the time, my mind went straight to dried blood. That was what it looked like to me. Old blood. Brown instead of bright red because it had dried a long time ago. That made the whole thing 10 times worse. My sister and I just stared at it for a moment. Then we ran. There was no discussion, no brave investigation, no poking it with a stick. We got out of that space and left the room. After that, I did not want to go back in there. Neither did she. The hidden attic space stopped being exciting immediately. Whatever curiosity we had about it disappeared the second we found that bundle. We tried telling our parents. We wanted them to go look. At least, I did. I wanted an adult to tell me what the thing actually was. Maybe that would have made the situation less frightening. Maybe my dad could have gone in, picked it up, and said, "This is just an old stuffed toy." Or, "It is insulation wrapped in cloth." Or even, "Yeah, that's a dead rat someone wrapped up for some reason." Any explanation would have been better than leaving it unknown. But my parents did not take us seriously. From what I remember, they thought we were imagining things or getting scared over nothing. Maybe they assumed we had found some piece of old material and turned it into a dead animal in our minds. Kids do that, especially in dark spaces. A bundle of insulation can look like fur. A rolled rag can look like a body. A piece of dried wood can look like a bone. So I understand why they did not immediately believe us. But my sister and I had seen the same thing, and neither of us wanted to go near it again. That is where the memory stayed. A hidden space, a cloth-wrapped shape, dark brown stains, something that seemed like a small animal, and nobody willing to confirm what it actually was. As I got older, I started thinking about what it could have been. The most dramatic possibility is obviously the one that came to mind when we were younger. Somebody had sacrificed animals there. That explanation fits the creepy version of the story perfectly. Old house, hidden attic, wrapped animal, dried blood, boarded well outside, dead animal in the shed. Put those details together, and it starts sounding like somebody had been doing rituals on the property. But that is exactly why I try not to jump to that conclusion now. Those details feel connected because they are all creepy. That does not mean they actually had anything to do with one another. The boarded well may simply have been unsafe. An uncovered well is dangerous, especially if children are around. Boarding it over would be completely normal. The dead animal in the shed might have wandered in and died. Or maybe the shed had been used for livestock at some point. Maybe what I thought was a dead cow was actually old hide, bones, or something else related to farm use. And the wrapped bundle in the attic could have had a completely separate explanation. There are a lot of reasons someone might wrap animal remains in cloth. None of them require a ritual. Maybe a previous owner found a dead animal in the house. A cat, a rabbit, a squirrel, a bird. Instead of carrying it through the house uncovered, they wrapped it before removing it. Then, for whatever reason, it got left behind. That would be strange, and gross, but not supernatural. Maybe someone planned to bury a pet. People sometimes wrap dead pets in towels, blankets, shirts, or cloth before burial. Perhaps the animal died during winter when the ground was frozen. The family temporarily put it in the attic or another cold area until they could bury it. Then they forgot. Or moved. Or something happened that prevented them from retrieving it. That sounds bizarre, but human beings leave strange things behind, especially in old houses that have had many owners. Another possibility is taxidermy. Maybe the bundle was not a whole dead animal at all. It could have been preserved skin. A small taxidermy project. An old hunting specimen. Someone might have wrapped it for storage and shoved it into the attic. Over time, the material darkened. What looked like dried blood could have been tanning chemicals, dirt, mold, or decomposition. Again, unpleasant, but not ritualistic. The dark brown color is probably one of the details I trust least now. At the time, I thought it looked like dried blood because what else would a child think? But old cloth turns brown for all kinds of reasons. Dust, water damage, rust, mold, animal waste, wood stain. Age, if something had been sitting in an attic for years, almost any fabric could become brown and ugly. Dried blood is only one possibility. I also do not know whether the entire cloth was brown or whether there were patches. Memory tends to simplify. I remember brown like dried blood. That does not mean I could prove blood was actually present. We never tested it. Nobody even confirmed the thing was organic. It is possible we were completely wrong about what we saw. Old insulation can look horrible, especially certain kinds that are dark, clumped, or wrapped in paper or fabric. A bundle of insulation with old water stains could absolutely look like a mummified animal in poor light. Same with rolled up cloth. Old dolls, stuffed toys, pest control materials, anything with an irregular shape. The attic probably did not have good lighting. We were looking from the opening behind the closet. If all we had was bedroom light reaching into a dark space, our eyes would have been working with very limited information. The brain fills gaps quickly. Something is small, wrapped brown, hidden. Therefore, dead animal. Once one of us said or thought it, the other might have seen it the same way. That is one possibility. But the fact that both of us reacted so strongly makes me think there probably was something genuinely disturbing about the bundle. Not necessarily supernatural, just disturbing. Maybe there really were animal remains inside. That would be enough. There is also a completely practical reason small animal bodies might end up in walls and attics. Animals get inside houses. Mice, rats, squirrels, birds, bats. Sometimes they become trapped and die. A previous owner doing repairs might find a carcass and wrap it before moving it. Maybe they set it aside temporarily. Maybe whoever was working there forgot it. Or maybe they intentionally left it because removing it through the finished part of the house would have been inconvenient. Gross? Yes. Impossible? Not even slightly. People doing home repairs make strange choices all the time. The hidden attic may also have been used as storage. Maybe we were not the first children to discover it. A previous family could have hidden something there as a prank. Older kids love putting creepy objects in places where younger siblings will eventually find them. A stuffed animal, wrapped like a mummy and stained brown, would have been a pretty effective scare. We never opened it, so we cannot know. That is the problem with the story. We did exactly what frightened kids do. We saw something scary and ran. That kept us safe from touching something potentially unsanitary, which was probably a good decision. But it also guaranteed we would never know what we found. If we had walked closer, maybe we would have seen immediately that it was fake. If my parents had checked, maybe the mystery would have ended. Instead, the room became forbidden in our minds. We did not want to use it. We did not want to open the panel. We definitely did not want to crawl into the attic. So the bundle remained exactly what it was during those first few seconds. Unknown, and unknown things get worse with time. I remember wondering if someone had killed the animal deliberately. That seemed more likely to me because it was wrapped. A naturally dead animal should just be lying there, right? Why cloth? Why hide it? Why put it behind a wall? But wrapping does not necessarily imply violence. As I said, people wrap dead pets. They wrap carcasses before disposal. They wrap things to contain smells or fluids. Someone might have found it already dead and handled it respectfully. The exact same physical evidence can support a very different story depending on the assumptions you bring. A child sees sacrifice. An adult might see someone's dead pet waiting for burial. Or a pest someone forgot to throw away. We had no context. I also think the rest of the property influenced how we interpreted it. If we had found that same bundle in a clean new house with a normal backyard, maybe we would have assumed it was garbage. But this house already had a boarded-up well. The shed already contained something dead. The building was old. There was a hidden space behind a closet. So by the time we saw the bundle, the property already felt like the kind of place where something bad might have happened. Our minds connected everything. Well, dead cow. Secret attic. Mummified animal. Now it sounds like a horror movie. But horror movies are built by taking unrelated, unsettling details and making them part of one story. Reality is often messier. Maybe the well was covered 30 years before the animal died. Maybe the shed belonged to a farmer. Maybe the attic bundle came from a completely different owner. Different decades, different explanations, no connection at all. That is probably more likely. Still, the hidden location bothers me. Not because secret attic spaces are supernatural. They are not. But because somebody had clearly been able to access that area before us. Whatever the object was, it did not just magically appear there. A person or animal had brought it in somehow. If it was deliberately wrapped in cloth, then a person had almost certainly handled it. Someone had stood in that same cramped space. Someone had placed the bundle there. That is an uncomfortable thought when you are looking at something that appears to contain a dead animal. You immediately wonder who and why. I sometimes imagine the previous owner. Maybe an elderly person lived there. Maybe they had a pet that died. Maybe they could not bring themselves to bury it right away. They wrapped it, put it somewhere hidden, then eventually forgot or passed away. That is sad, but not sinister. Maybe someone collected animal specimens. Maybe it was part of a hunting hobby. Maybe the cloth was simply packaging. There are endless normal stories. The ritual idea is only one of them, and probably not the strongest without other evidence. We never found symbols, no candles, no writing, no repeated animal remains that I remember, no knives, nothing arranged in a circle, nothing that would specifically point toward sacrifice, just one wrapped object. That distinction matters. If I am being fair, calling it a sacrifice would be inventing an explanation that the evidence does not support. It looked creepy. That is all. The dead cow or animal in the shed was another thing I never understood properly. At the time, I assumed it had something to do with the house being weird, but old rural properties often have animal remains. A shed can become a place where wildlife gets trapped. An animal can crawl inside when sick and die. If the building had once been used for livestock, there could be old bones or hides stored there. My childhood memory may also exaggerate the size. Maybe it was not an entire cow. Maybe it was part of one. Maybe it was a deer. I only remember that it looked like something large and dead enough that we did not want to enter. The well is similar. Boarded-up wells sound sinister because of stories about things hidden inside them. But an old well should be covered. It is a serious fall hazard. The safest thing anyone could do with an unused well is secure it. So that detail may actually show responsibility rather than anything creepy. I know all of that now. It does not change how the property felt as a kid. At that age, every unexplained feature became part of the same atmosphere. You walk past the shed and remember the dead animal. You look toward the well and remember it is boarded shut. Then you go upstairs and know there is a dark space behind one bedroom closet containing something wrapped in stained cloth. That combination sticks with you. After we found it, I avoided that bedroom. I did not want to sleep there. I did not want to stand near the closet. Even though the panel was closed, I knew what was behind it. That is enough to make a normal wall feel different. You know there is space beyond it. You start imagining sounds, scratching, movement, something shifting. I do not remember actually hearing anything from inside. That is important. There were no footsteps in the attic. No object moved. The panel never opened itself. Nothing came out. The fear was based entirely on what we had already seen, and that makes sense. If you think there might be a mummified animal hidden behind your closet wall, you do not need paranormal activity to make the room uncomfortable. The object itself is enough. I also think my parents' disbelief made the whole thing worse. If they had investigated, we might have gotten an answer. Instead, we were left with the feeling that there was something disturbing inside our house that the adults did not even believe existed. That creates a particular kind of childhood fear. You cannot fix it yourself. You are too scared to go back. The people who could check will not. So nothing changes. The room remains exactly as it was. The panel stays closed. The thing stays behind it. At least, that is what we believed. Maybe my parents did inspect it later without telling us. Maybe one of them removed the object. I honestly do not know. As children, once we decided never to enter that room again, we probably stopped checking. For all I know, the bundle was gone a week later. Memory freezes the scene because we never returned to update it. It is also possible my parents were right and there was almost nothing there. Maybe they had looked into the space previously and knew it contained insulation or construction material. When we came running downstairs talking about a wrapped dead animal, they may have immediately understood what we had mistaken for one. If that was the case, I wish they had explained it. But parents do not always realize which childhood fears are going to stick around for decades. To them, it may have been a 2-minute conversation. To me, it became one of the creepiest memories from that house. The fact that the object looked mummified is another detail worth questioning. Real mummification happens when a body dries instead of decomposing normally. Small animals trapped inside dry buildings can naturally become partially mummified. That is not rare. A mouse or squirrel in an attic can dry out significantly, especially if the environment has low moisture and good airflow. The body shrinks, skin darkens, everything turns brown and leathery. If somebody later wrapped such an animal in cloth, or if it had become tangled in old material, it could look exactly like some intentionally prepared mummy. No ritual required. Even the dried blood color could simply have been the animal itself or decomposition staining. If that is what we found, then the story becomes much simpler. A small animal got into the attic years earlier. Died, dried, got caught, or wrapped in material. Two kids discovered it and understandably panicked. That might be the answer. I actually find that pretty plausible. Old houses are full of dead animals in places people never inspect. Walls, chimneys, attics, crawl spaces. You usually do not know they are there unless there is a smell or you happen to open something. We happened to open something. There is also a chance the wrapping was nesting material rather than human cloth. Rodents pull fabric, insulation, paper, and other materials into nests. A dead animal surrounded by shredded cloth could look intentionally wrapped. If we only looked for a few seconds, we might have mistaken a nest for a burial wrapping. Again, completely ordinary. That is why I do not confidently say someone sacrificed anything there. Could they have? Technically, sure. People do strange things. But there is no evidence strong enough to make that the best explanation. I would rather leave it unresolved than turn a childhood memory into a darker story just because the setting fits. What I know is creepy enough. There was something in that hidden space. My sister saw it too. It looked like a small animal wrapped in material. It was dark brown. We thought the color looked like old dried blood. We both immediately wanted out. Those are the facts as I remember them. The rest is guessing. Years later, I still wonder what would have happened if we had forced one of our parents to go upstairs with us. Would they have laughed? Would they have suddenly gone quiet? Would they have removed it? Would they have recognized it as something completely harmless? That is the missing moment I wish I had. An adult interpretation. Instead, all I have is the perspective of two frightened kids in a dark attic space. That is not ideal evidence. But it is a strong memory. The house itself eventually became just another place we had lived. We moved again. That was normal for my family. Addresses changed. Bedrooms changed. New neighborhoods replaced old ones. But some houses leave behind specific images. For that Oregon house, I remember the property first. The old two-story shape. The well in the back with boards covering it. The shed we avoided because of the dead animal inside. Then upstairs, the closet, the wooden panel, that little hidden space beyond the wall, and the object on the other side. I still do not know if it was really an animal. I am fairly sure it looked like one. Maybe if I saw the exact same thing now, as an adult, I would immediately understand what it was. Maybe I would laugh at how scared we had been. I hope that is true. But there is also a possibility that I would look at it now and say exactly what I said in my head then. That is something dead. And somebody wrapped it. That would still leave the same question. Why? Maybe burial. Maybe disposal. Maybe taxidermy. Maybe pest removal. Maybe some previous child's strange project. Maybe something less innocent. Without the object, there is no way to know. I do think the way we reacted protected us from one very real danger. We did not touch it. That was smart. Old animal remains can carry bacteria, insects, mold, or other things you do not want on your hands. Even if it was only some old bundle covered in animal waste, touching it would have been a bad idea. Running away may not have solved the mystery, but it was better than two kids unwrapping an unknown, decomposed object with their bare hands. So I cannot criticize younger me too much. We saw something gross and potentially unsafe. We left. The mistake was never getting an adult to seriously investigate. But that was not really under our control. Maybe the reason the story has lasted so long is because it never had an ending. Most scary childhood memories eventually get one. The monster in the closet turns out to be a coat. The scratching outside is a branch. The shadow is a parent walking down the hall. You grow up and understand. This one never got that final step. The panel closed. The room was avoided. My parents dismissed it. We moved. And so my brain has been able to keep every possible explanation alive, including the worst ones. I can imagine a previous owner doing rituals. I can imagine someone hiding dead pets. I can imagine an animal crawling into the attic and drying naturally. I can imagine an old stuffed toy covered in water damage. All of them fit because nobody opened the bundle. That is the frustrating thing about mysteries. Sometimes the scariest explanation survives not because it is the most likely, but because nobody collected enough information to eliminate it. If I had to choose now, I would not choose sacrifice. I would choose old animal remains, possibly from a pest hunting-related storage, or something that died inside the structure and was later wrapped, or became tangled in material. That fits an old house much better than some elaborate hidden ritual. The brown staining could easily have been age, decomposition, mold, dirt, or old biological material. The boarded well and dead animal in the shed were probably unrelated. That is the explanation that requires the fewest assumptions. But I understand why 10-year-old me did not think that way. I was not evaluating probabilities. I was standing beside my sister inside a hidden attic space in an old house, looking at a small body-shaped thing wrapped in cloth that appeared to be stained dark brown. We did not think interesting, perhaps naturally mummified remains associated with a previous household or pest problem. We thought, what the hell is that? Then we ran. And once we knew it was behind that closet, neither of us wanted to step into that room again. Maybe there was never anything sinister about the house. Maybe every creepy detail had a completely normal explanation. The safe well, the animal in the shed. The wrapped remains in the attic. Old properties collect things. That is probably all it was. But even now, when I think about that house, I always end up back upstairs. Not at the well, not at the shed, at that wooden panel in the closet. Because somewhere behind it, in a part of the house we did not even know existed until we opened it, was a small brown stained bundle shaped enough like a dead animal that my sister and I took one look at it, ran from the room, and never found out what someone had wrapped up and hidden there. When I was around 8 years old, I lived in a small town at the very end of a dead-end road. Our house was positioned in a way that made it feel slightly isolated, even though we were still part of a neighborhood. There was no road continuing past us. Once you reached our place, that was basically the end. One thing I remember clearly about the house was how many windows there were across the front. During the day, I never thought much about them. They were just windows. But because there were so many, you could see a lot of the inside of the house from outside, especially depending on which lights were on. That became important because when I was younger, I started seeing things through those windows. Not every day, not every time I looked, but often enough that I remembered it. Sometimes I would be outside playing and glance toward the house. Other times, I would be in the car with my mother while she drove us home. She would pull into the parking area, and while we were still outside, I would look through the windows. That was when I would sometimes see what looked like shadow figures moving through the house. They were fast. That is one of the details I remember most strongly. I would look through a window and see a dark, human-shaped figure suddenly move across the room. Sometimes it seemed to run from one side of the house to the other. Then it would disappear from view. It did not stop. It did not stand at the window. It never waved at me. I never saw a face. Just a dark shape moving quickly through a place where, as far as I knew, nobody should have been moving. At 8 years old, I did not have a good explanation for that. My first thought was usually that somebody was inside. Maybe another family member had gotten home first. Maybe someone was walking through the living room. But when I went inside, I would search. Nothing. No one hiding. No stranger. No family member who had been running through the house. The rooms would be empty. Everything would look completely normal. That made it worse. If I had gone inside and found my dad or somebody else walking around, the mystery would have ended immediately. Instead, I would see movement through the window, go inside expecting someone to be there, and find nothing. After it happened enough times, I started paying more attention. I would stare at the windows before going inside. Sometimes I would wait, almost hoping to see the figure again long enough to understand what it was. But the sightings were always quick. A shadow. Movement gone. I remember pointing it out to my mother at least once. I told her I had seen something moving inside the house. She did not believe me. I was a child, so I understand why. From an adult's point of view, an 8-year-old saying they're shadow people running through an empty house sounds like imagination. Maybe I saw a reflection. Maybe a bird flew past. Maybe a car moved behind us and created a shifting shadow. There were plenty of ordinary explanations. My mother had no reason to assume there were actual people or anything supernatural inside, so she dismissed it. I tried to dismiss it too. But when you are the person who keeps seeing something, being told it is nothing does not automatically make it disappear. I still looked through those windows. And every once in a while, I would see another dark figure rush past. I cannot remember exactly how many times it happened. Childhood memories are strange that way. I remember the experience clearly without having an exact count. Maybe it happened 5 times. Maybe 15. Maybe there were only a few especially strong sightings and memory makes them feel more frequent. I cannot honestly say. What I remember is that it happened enough for me to recognize the pattern. Outside the house. Look in. Dark shape. Fast movement. Go inside. Nothing there. That became part of how I thought about that house. The windows stopped feeling completely normal. Whenever we came home, some part of me expected movement behind them. I think the fact that the figures moved quickly made them more frightening than if I had seen something standing still. A stationary shadow could be furniture, a coat, a doorway. But movement makes the brain immediately think, person. Something alive. Something is in there. That reaction happens before you have time to analyze what you are seeing. Then, by the time I focused directly on the spot, the shape would already be gone. There was never enough time to study it. And that is exactly the kind of situation where peripheral vision can create convincing mistakes. I understand that now. Human peripheral vision is good at detecting movement, but it is not very good at detail. Your eyes notice something shift at the edge of your vision. Your brain has to decide what it was quickly. A person-shaped shadow is one of the easiest interpretations, especially for a child. If I was looking through one window while something moved in a reflection across another, the movement could seem like it was happening inside. The house had many front windows, which probably created a lot of opportunities for reflections. Cars, trees, clouds, people outside, even me moving. Glass reflects whatever is on the brighter side. Depending on the time of day, sometimes a window acts almost like a mirror. At other times, you can see through it clearly. That can create strange combinations where an outside reflection appears layered over the interior of the house. A person walking behind me could look like a dark figure moving across the living room. A tree branch shifting in the wind could become something passing quickly through a doorway. A car turning onto the road could throw moving light and shadow across several windows at once. As an adult, those explanations make a lot of sense. At 8, I did not think about how glass and light worked. I only knew what my eyes seemed to show me. Someone ran through the house. Then there was nobody inside. The dead-end road may have contributed too. Because our house sat at the end, vehicles approaching us would often be turning, slowing down, or changing angle as they reached the property. Headlights, even before full darkness, can create moving shadows across walls. Sunlight reflecting off windshields can do something similar during the day. If I was riding in my mother's car, our own movement would constantly change the angle of light hitting the windows. A reflection that seemed to race through the house could actually be caused by us pulling into the parking space. That is a very strong possibility. It might explain why some of the sightings happened while arriving home. The car moves. My viewing angle changes quickly. Reflections slide across the glass. For half a second, one looks human. My brain sees a figure running. Then the car stops and the image disappears. When I enter the house, of course nobody is there. That explanation is ordinary, but it fits. The sightings while I was already outside playing are harder to connect to the car, but there were still plenty of moving light sources around. Wind, animals, other people, anything passing outside the window could create a reflection. And because I had already formed the expectation that I sometimes saw shadow figures, I probably became more likely to interpret ambiguous movement the same way again. That does not mean I was making it up. Expectation changes perception without anyone choosing it. Once your brain learns a pattern, it looks for it. If you become convinced a certain hallway is creepy, every small sound in that hallway gets your attention. If you think a window is where you see shadows, every flash of movement there becomes important. I may have accidentally trained myself to notice every possible figure-like shape in those windows. There was another strange thing that happened in that house, too. Every once in a while, I would hear someone call my name, usually when nobody was around. That was different from the shadows because it was sound rather than sight. I would hear my name clearly enough that I thought somebody wanted me. Maybe my mother, maybe another family member. I would respond or go looking, then discover nobody had called me. Sometimes no one was even close enough to have done it. That scared me too. There is something especially personal about hearing your own name. Random noises can be ignored. A creak is a creak. A bump is a bump. But your name immediately gets your attention. Humans are extremely sensitive to it. If you think someone has called your name, you turn automatically. You do not stop and analyze the acoustics first. You react. Then when nobody is there, the silence afterward feels strange. As a child, I did not know how many ordinary sounds can resemble speech. A television in another room, someone talking outside, water running, a fan, a distant voice. Even birds or other environmental noises can occasionally produce a rhythm that the brain interprets as a familiar word. And your own name is probably one of the easiest words for the brain to find because you have heard it thousands of times. The same way people sometimes think their phone vibrated when it did not, you can think someone called you because your brain is always prepared to notice that signal. There is even a simple experience almost everyone has had. You are in a crowded place and suddenly think you hear your name. You turn. No one was talking to you. Maybe someone said a similar word. Maybe another person had the same name. Maybe you misheard. The experience feels real in the moment. That could easily have happened to me at home, especially because I was young and probably spent much of my time expecting my parents to call for me. Come inside. Dinner. Clean your room. Stop doing that. Kids hear their names constantly. So my brain may have been primed for it. Still, I remember some of those moments feeling too clear. I would stop whatever I was doing because I was sure someone had spoken. Then, nothing. When that happened in the same house where I already thought I was seeing figures, naturally I connected the experiences. Shadow people, voices, something strange in the house. That is how the story formed in my mind. Maybe the two things had absolutely nothing to do with each other. The visual experiences could have been reflections. The name calling could have been misheard sounds. But childhood does not separate evidence that carefully. If two creepy things happen in one place, they belong together. The house becomes the explanation. There is something in this house. That idea can make everything that happens afterward feel more significant. A door moves slightly. The house did it. You hear a noise upstairs. Something is walking. A reflection passes the window. There is the shadow person again. Once the idea exists, it becomes difficult to stop reinforcing it. I also have to consider that the house itself may simply have produced unusual sounds. Older houses can be noisy. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes carry sound. Heating systems click. Ducks can make voices from another room travel in strange directions. If someone outside spoke near one part of the house, the sound might enter through a vent or open window and seem like it came from somewhere else. My name may not even have been spoken. A house full of irregular noises gives the brain a lot of material to interpret. The visual side has similar problems. Multiple windows mean multiple layers of light. If curtains moved, that could create human-like shadows. If trees were near the house, their branches could sweep across walls. If people walked outside on one side, their silhouettes might project through another room. The interior may also have had furniture positioned in ways that created temporary figures when seen from outside. A chair back, a coat rack, a lamp, a doorway. Viewed through several panes of glass, those objects could combine into a shape that looks much more human than it does when standing inside the room. That might explain another detail. Why did I never find anything when I searched? Because the figure may never have been a physical object in the exact place I thought it was. It existed only from a particular viewing angle outside. Once I walked into the house, the angle changed. The illusion disappeared. I could search every room and never reproduce it. That would make the experience feel impossible, even though nothing had actually moved. I also think being a child matters more than I wanted to admit when I was younger. At 8, imagination and perception are closely connected. That does not mean children hallucinate everything or cannot be trusted. It means a child has less experience identifying ambiguous sensory information. An adult sees a shadow and thinks headlights. A child sees the same shadow and first thinks someone ran past. Experience teaches us what kinds of mistakes our eyes make. At 8, I had not learned all of those corrections yet. I remember the figures vividly. But vividness is not the same thing as perfect accuracy. Some of my strongest childhood memories are probably wrong in small ways. Rooms I remember as huge look tiny in old photographs. Distances were shorter. Colors were different. People were younger than I picture them now. Memory keeps the emotional shape while changing details. The shadow figures may have become darker, faster, and more human-like over the years simply because those are the details that mattered. I am not saying that definitely happened. I am saying I cannot use a memory from childhood as if it were security camera footage. The fact that I stopped seeing the figures after we moved is interesting, but it does not necessarily mean they belong to the house. The new city meant a new home. Different windows, different lighting, different surroundings, different routines. If the original house had a specific combination of reflections and viewing angles that created those illusions, moving would naturally stop them. The new house may simply not have reproduced the conditions. Likewise, if I became older around the same time, my perception may have changed. Maybe I got better at recognizing shadows. Maybe I stopped watching the windows so closely. Maybe the fear faded and I stopped noticing ambiguous movement. The disappearance after moving can feel like evidence that something stayed behind. But it can also fit ordinary explanations perfectly. Different environment, different experiences. That said, I understand why the timing bothers me. If I had continued seeing shadow figures everywhere, I would probably think the cause was something about me. Instead, the experiences seem tied to one house. There, then gone. That naturally makes the house feel responsible. I sometimes wonder what I would see if I could stand outside that place now. Same parking spot, same angle, same time of day. Maybe I could immediately recreate it. I might see a tree reflected across the front windows and think, that was it. Maybe cars turning at the end of the road would send shadows racing across the rooms. Maybe the explanation would be obvious to adult eyes. I would actually like that. There is something satisfying about solving a childhood fear. But I do not know if the house is even the same now. Windows get replaced. Trees are cut down. Furniture changes. Buildings are remodeled. The exact conditions may be gone, so the memory stays unresolved. I also wish I had been able to describe the figures better when it was happening. Were they adult-sized? Child-sized? Did they have arms and legs clearly visible? Were they completely black? Did they move upright? I remember the impression of human-shaped shadows, but the details are weak. That itself suggests the sightings were brief. If a real person had run through a brightly visible room, I might remember clothing, hair, body shape. Something instead, I remember movement and darkness. That is exactly what peripheral vision preserves best. Movement, contrast, not detail. The lack of features also made the figures easier to treat as something paranormal later. A real stranger has a face. A shadow does not. But there is no reason to assume featurelessness means supernatural. If you only see someone for half a second through reflective glass, you may not see features anyway. There could even have been real people outside on the opposite side of the window. A neighbor walking. Someone on the road. A family member behind me. Their reflection could appear inside the house and move with them. By the time I entered, of course, they were gone. That might explain some sightings better than shadows alone. I think the unanswered voice experiences probably strengthened my confidence that the figures were real. If only one strange thing happened, you can dismiss it. But when two types of things happen, they seem to confirm each other. I see figures. I hear my name. Therefore, something is trying to get my attention. That is a compelling story. But logically, it does not follow. Two unrelated perception errors are still possible. In fact, a child who is already nervous about one strange experience may become more attentive to another. The first fear makes the second more likely to be noticed. I probably listened more carefully after the shadow sightings. Every faint voice became significant. Then, every unexplained voice made the next shadow more frightening. It could build on itself. That does not make the experience meaningless. If anything, it shows how a place can become emotionally charged without anything impossible happening. The house became scary because I expected strange things there. And expectation changes what it feels like to live somewhere. Even during normal moments, part of you is watching. That can be exhausting for a kid. I never found anyone inside after seeing the figures. That is probably the strongest fact pushing me away from an actual intruder explanation. If strangers had repeatedly been running through our home, there would have been signs. Doors disturbed, objects moved, things stolen, adults noticing, police eventually involved. Nothing like that happened. So whatever I saw almost certainly was not multiple unknown people physically running through the rooms. That leaves shadows, reflections, mistaken perception, or something I cannot identify. Of those, reflections seem the most likely to me now. The front of the house had many windows. The house was at the end of a road. I often noticed the movement while approaching from outside. Those conditions are almost perfect for visual confusion. Still, likely is not the same as remembering it differently. In memory, the figures moved like people, fast, purposeful, 1 second in one part of the house, then gone. And every time I opened the door afterward, I had that moment of hesitation. What if someone actually is in there this time? I would search. Nothing. That process probably scared me more than the original sighting. Looking through an empty house when you expect to find someone is unsettling. Every room becomes a question. Behind the couch? Hallway? Bedroom? You listen for movement. Nothing. The silence begins feeling like the figure is hiding rather than absent. A child can easily turn that into a much bigger fear. The same happened when I heard my name. I would go toward whoever I thought called. Then, nobody knew what I was talking about. Again, the ordinary explanation disappeared. So the mystery got stronger. I understand why my mother did not believe me. There was nothing for her to see. Every event happened when I was the only person paying attention. By the time I pointed, the figure was gone. By the time I asked who called me, the sound had ended. From her perspective, there was no evidence. From mine, the lack of evidence was part of what made it scary. I think children and adults can experience the exact same event differently, because adults already know how often perception fails. An adult sees movement through glass and checks the reflection. A child checks the house. An adult hears something like their name and waits for it to happen again. A child assumes somebody called. That difference is probably enough to explain why my mother brushed it off while I remembered it for years. Eventually, we moved to another city. New house, new streets, new windows, and the shadow figures stopped. I do not remember seeing them at the next place. I do not remember repeatedly hearing my name when nobody was around either. Whatever those experiences were, they belonged to that period of my childhood. That should probably make the memory easier to dismiss. Instead, sometimes it makes it stranger. There is a part of me that still thinks, why only there? Why that house? Maybe because of the windows. Maybe because of the road. Maybe because I was 8. Maybe because that was simply where a child's imagination became attached to a certain pattern. Those explanations are enough. I do not need to believe something lived there. There was never any direct interaction. Nothing touched me. Nothing stood beside my bed. No figure ever stopped running and looked back. The voices never said anything beyond what sounded like my name. No message, no threat, no event that could not have happened through ordinary perception. That matters. If I am being careful, the story is not proof of anything paranormal. It is a memory of seeing and hearing things I could not explain at the time. But even now, I can still picture sitting in the car while my mother pulled toward the house, looking through the front windows, seeing a dark figure suddenly move across one room, fast enough that I only caught it for a second. Then another window. Nothing. We park. I tell my mother. She does not believe me. I go inside anyway. The house is quiet. I search. No one there. That sequence happened often enough that it became part of how I remember living there. And because I was never able to prove what caused it, the childhood explanation and the adult explanation still compete a little. Adult me says reflections, shadows, peripheral vision, misheard sounds, a child's imagination. All reasonable. 8-year-old me still remembers looking through those windows and being completely certain that something dark had just run through our empty house. I think both versions can exist without me having to choose a ghost story. Maybe my eyes were fooled. Maybe my ears were fooled. Maybe the house had exactly the right lighting and acoustics to create experiences that felt impossible to a child. That is probably what happened. But when I think about that dead-end road now, I do not first remember the normal days. I remember coming home. I remember the front of the house full of windows. And I remember watching something dark move quickly behind the glass before I had even gotten inside. Then, opening the door and finding every room empty. The figures never followed us when we moved. Neither did the voices. And whatever the explanation was, I have never seen them run through another house since.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.